So let's dive into the metric alert type now. The metric alert type enables you to trigger alerts based on metric values. So for our PromQL query, we can look at things like load time, for example, and we can query on different values that exists in load time as well. So what this will do is it'll give me only the Prometheus metrics for the load time with a value of continent of Asia. So it's just a standard PromQL dialog. If you're unfamiliar with PromQL, there is a wealth of information out on the internet and also on the Coralogix site as well. And you can also see a link off to the PromQL documentation right here in the UI as well. So you can see here that the Prometheus documentation is really accessible. So if you're unsure, just try out that link. You'll notice some similar conditions again, more than, less than, more than usual. So this functions very similarly to the standard alert type that we discussed before. Only rather than it being the count of a given metric or anything like that, it's the actual metric value. So more than, so let's say it's a latency metric, 100 for, let's say, 10% of the last 10 minutes. That means over the last 10-minute span, there has to have been at least 1 minute where the metric exceeded the value of 100. Now, there are some nuances to this that we need to understand. There can be times when there is missing values in your data. And what you need to do is understand how you want to deal with this. So metrics can often have missed samples. It happens a lot for various different reasons. So the big one is, let's say you've got a 10-minute time window. Now, for 50% of that time, you were sending data, and 50% of that time, you weren't sending data. Data is missing. Now, by default, what Coralogix will do is it will look at that 10-minute window and say, okay, only 5 minutes of it has data. So now we effectively have a 5-minute window. So where before we said that it's a 10-minute time window and 10%, and that means 1 minute there must be 1 minute's worth of samples that exceed the value. Because half of your data is missing, the whole time window becomes 5 minutes. Therefore, the requirement is now 30 seconds of that time window exceeds it. And that's because of the missing data. Now, if you don't like this behavior, what you can do, you can tick this box here, and this will replace the missing values with 0. And what that will do is that any time a sample is missing, it becomes 0, so you're always evaluating on a 10-minute time frame. The only problem with this, of course, is that 0 might be significant to you for some reason. So, for example, it could be that you want a metric to make sure that your sales are over a certain amount and that kind of thing, and you don't want that number to hit 0, or you trigger an alarm because that might be an indication that something's wrong with the website. So in this case, what you can do is you can say, okay, I want to decide what like a good quality sample of my data is. So you can say, for example, okay, measure the time frame of the last 10 minutes and only trigger an alarm if the condition is met and at least 90% of that time frame is filled with data. So if you have a situation where we discussed before where half of the data is missing and half is present, then you won't trigger an alarm on that. That's kind of like a quality control thing for you. Once again, you can preview the alert. So there's no condition there, so you can do that. But if we just do that, so any load time, and we refresh, you'll see here all the different times, all the different values for this alert, and you can see those lines there indicating when the alarm would have fired. So this threshold of 100 essentially means that you would have a lot of alarms firing for this thing. Now, this is for more than usual. As one might expect, it's very, very similar to the logs. So if the value of the metric is higher than what it normally is, then this will trigger an alarm. Again, you have the for over 10% of the last 5-10 minutes or whatever, and a minimum requirement of the data. Strongly recommend that you set the minimum requirement, the minimum data requirement for that time frame to something high, like 90%. That just guarantees that there's something strange going on. So we've looked at more than and more than usual. Then we have less than. So for less than, you have a similar situation. The value is less than 100 for 10% over the last 10 minutes. There is, however, a situation where you have undetected values. So what are undetected values? So let's say you've got a metric with 10 different labels on there. So for example, you have one metric per country in which you operate. One of those countries is, for argument's sake, let's say it's the UK. Now, that UK metric stops delivering, stops sending. this may indicate that the value is missing or something, and it becomes an undetected value. And you have to decide what you're going to do about undetected values. So if you say replace missing values with 0, then the problem kind of solves itself in terms of the 90% time frame. What you can do is you can completely disable trigger on undetected values. So that means that if a metric stops coming through, then it won't trigger the alarm. Or what you can do is you can set a retirement period. So for example, an hour. And what that means is that it will trigger for that hour, but then after that, it will stop triggering on the undetected value. This is very specific to your use case, so I'd strongly just have a think, do you want to alert if data for a given permutation of labels stops coming through or not? That's kind of up to you. But this is something to be very aware of because it's a specific nuance for metrics and standard alerts as well, but it's not as common with standard alerts. It's usually with the metric alerts that we see the most engagement there. So it's just something to be aware of when you're configuring these alarms. As usual, metric alerts come with all of the normal things that one might expect. So you get this nice alert preview with all the different values, and it shows when that would have triggered. You can see the notification groups, as we discussed before, and the schedule, as we discussed before. So that was the standard alert type and the metric alert type. So that's a deep dive of two of the big alert types. So next, we're going to go into troubleshooting. I'm going to go through a list of the most common problems that people experience. And hopefully this will mean this video gives you a really nice, well-rounded experience, a deep dive into standard and metric alerts, an awareness of all the alert types, and after the next section, a decent understanding of some of the most common problems you're going to run into, so you're really well prepared to start your alerting journey in Coralogix.